A very good afternoon. It's 2 p.m. This is Market View. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Lungilele Makakula. Eswatini across different sectors are taking initiative, working together to support government's efforts, drive private sector growth, and empower communities. One such contributor is Kuluma Eswatini. This is a homegrown company that is committed to building sustainable brands in competitive markets. Kuluma Eswatini helps organizations craft strategic narratives, strengthen their market position, and also cultivate meaningful relationships with their stakeholders. It is run by Eswatini with a strong passion for innovation and impact. Kuluma Eswatini also prioritizes supporting recent graduates, nurturing local talent, and also turning fresh ideas into tangible results. Today in studio we'll be joined by Nomvuseli Lotala, who is the Public Relations Officer, to tell us more about their company. And in our leading stories today, in 2024, Eswatini's tourism industry hit a new high, welcoming 964,880 international visitors. Let's go straight to our first story. In 2024, Eswatini's tourism industry hit a new high, welcoming 964,880 international visitors, a stunning 14.5% surge from 2023. This record-breaking growth was announced by the Chief Executive Officer of the Eswatini Tourism Authority, Vusi Dlamini, during a media briefing at Mountain View in Mbabane.
By the end of the year, we were sitting at 964,880. That's the number that we had at the end of 2024. And this shows an increase of about 14.5% compared to 2023. But what I want us to note is that in 2019, which is before COVID, we were sitting at 1.225.520, which is 1,225,520 in terms of the tourist arrivals by 2019. And if you note, this was before COVID. We note that we still haven't reached that number as a country, but we are seeing some progress in the current year as well, and we do hope that even if we don't reach that number, but hopefully we will break the 1 million number by end of this year.
The chief executive has also shared the number of jobs generated through the tourism sector and the main countries from which most visitors are coming from.
Jobs supported through the tourism sector is 9,048, and of this, most would be accommodation and restaurants, and then others in the arts, entertainment, and recreation. Where our visitors coming from, I think on an average, this is where they are coming from predominantly. We see that they would be coming from Africa, as we all are aware that we are part of the African continent. And then we've got Europe at 7.5%, Asia and the Pacific at 2.3%, and then the North and South Americas would be at 1.7%.
The Eswatini Tourism Authority has stated that they need to strengthen efforts to attract more tourists and capitalize on existing agreements. The CEO has also mentioned plans to explore new markets to identify potential sources of tourism. For Market View, Nelson Dlangamandla, Vuminkosi Nzinisa and Derek Nsibi, Mbabane.
The Eswatini Revenue Service has warned businesses and individuals of scammers who are misrepresenting themselves as ERS representatives. These scammers are calling clients and using excuses like verification or troubleshooting to try to obtain clients' login details for the Eswatini Revenue Service TaxPal, an online tax management platform created by the service designed to make tax compliance easier for individuals and businesses in Eswatini. The service says it will never ask for clients' login information, adding that all official updates, support and communication come only through verified and secure channels. The service has urged business people to protect themselves as they use their TaxPal by never sharing their login credentials with anyone and not to respond to unsolicited calls or messages claiming to be from the Eswatini Revenue Service. Business owners have been urged to always verify any communication directly through official ERS contact points. And in our international news, the British Army has been in decline for the past 2 decades, a growing need to deter any Russian threat and potentially without US support has highlighted the urgency NATO members like the UK face in boosting defense spending. But in Britain, that necessity comes against a backdrop of weak economic growth, rising borrowing costs and public ambivalence, possibly requiring major trade-offs by Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Britain is back on a war footing, but apparently in threadbare shoes. Meanwhile, the deadliest conflict in Europe since 1945 is already here. The threat of Russian aggression is perceived to be only increasing, and patience between NATO members is wearing thin.
Our allies have taken advantage of us more so than our enemies. I said, if you're not going to pay your bills, we're not going to defend you.
The issue is that while the threat is immediate, the fiscal cupboard is bare, and there's no time for saving.
Voters say that they want more security and they're in favour of greater defence spending. They don't necessarily want to pay for it.
So now one of the most critical jobs for the UK government is to find a solution, and quickly. A key point of the government's latest strategic defence review, published in June, set out plans for Britain to return to war-fighting competitiveness. That includes addressing low ammunition reserves and sluggish, outdated procurement cycles.
Since 1955, there's been a correlation between the UK's ballooning health and welfare bill and cuts to defence spending.
As a share of GDP over the last 7 decades, the UK's military expenditure has decreased, while spending on healthcare has gone the other direction. This is that so-called peace dividend in action.
The last NATO Defence Industrial Pledge was agreed at the Wales Summit in 2014, which was to spend 2% by 2024, which just over 2/3 of allies do now.
Some contribute more.
Poland spends 4%, a little over 4% of GDP, and the US as well spends 3.4% of GDP on defence.
The world is just a far more dangerous place.
And it's now widely accepted that no one pays enough for defence, and that NATO relies overwhelmingly on the US for leadership, coordination, muscle and money.
2% is a start, as President Trump has said, but it's not enough. More like 5%.
This kind of rhetoric has only grown louder since Donald Trump returned to the White House.
It's not a coincidence that the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced that he would ramp up defence spending in the UK just weeks after US President Donald Trump entered office.
All that in May, he signed a defence pact between the EU and the UK. But, as we've seen, Britain has decades of making up to do, munition stockpiles to replenish, soldiers and reservists to recruit, and we haven't even mentioned things like these: nuclear submarines or AI-guided drones and cyber defence. Bloomberg Economics estimated that raising defence spending to 5% of GDP will add £350 billion to the level of government debt by 2032. But the administration's hands are tied.
It has said in its manifesto that it doesn't want to raise income tax, it doesn't want to raise VAT, it doesn't want to raise corporation tax or employee national insurance contributions. Those taxes account for the vast majority of tax revenue in the UK.
So that's out then. The other option is borrowing, but servicing Britain's existing debt, that is to say, just paying the interest, costs £100 billion a year. A decision to hike that would be taken against a backdrop of elevated interest rates and start a figurative war with the bond market. Polling suggests defence spending is low on the British public's priority list compared to healthcare, immigration, or the economy. With that in mind, the other option, if it can be called such a thing, is to rely on high levels of defence spending in an attempt to boost long-term economic growth.
And the other area where the evidence suggests the economies stand to benefit is where military spending is focused on research and development.
That could lift UK productivity, meaning employers create more value for the same amount of work. For instance, producing autonomous drones rather than basic munitions or small arms.
Research and development takes up a very small share of the UK defence budget, so there would need to be a big ramp up in research and development spending to yield a big impact on the economy.
Defence strategy is now trapped by a fundamental paradox. A system designed for short-term survival is being asked to make long-term rearmament commitments. Everyone agrees Britain needs to prepare. Nobody knows whether it can afford to.
Right, and that's it for our business news. After the break, we're joined by Nomvusile Lotala from Kuluma, Eswatini. Stay with us.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.za. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. This is Market View. We continue with our program. With youth unemployment in the country currently at 48.7%, according to the National Labour Market Skills Project's Anticipation Report, Eswatini across different sectors are taking initiative, working together to support government's efforts, drive private sector growth, and also empower communities. One such contributor is Kuluma Eswatini, a homegrown company committed to building sustainable brands in competitive markets. Kuluma also helps organizations craft strategic narratives, strengthen their market position, and cultivate meaningful relationships with stakeholders. Run by Eswatini with a strong passion for innovation and impact, Kuluma Eswatini also prioritizes supporting recent graduates, nurturing local talent, and turning fresh ideas into tangible results. So how do they plan to make this happen? We're joined by Nomvusile Lotala, who is the Public Relations Officer, to tell us more about Kuluma. Very good afternoon. Welcome to the program. I think I've just summarized it. What is Kuluma Eswatini? I understand that you're a new baby in the industry, established in March this year.
Yes.
What is your mandate as an organization?
Well, Kuluma Eswatini is a building brand company, which we help companies building brands for themselves.
Okay. So, how's that going so far, seeing that you're a new baby in the industry in Safiga and Kalenga March? How do you approach your clients?
Well, we offer what we have. We help them in building logos, building brand for their companies, and self-mastering.
Okay. So I understand what's in my strategies, as a company that you guys use, and also you have creative solutions to help these companies. What are they effective? What is your approach, Leni Sebendisago, as a company?
Well, see, sisebenzisana ngemakhambani ukuthi siwaside ekutakheleni nesitfundi siphindze siwaside ukuthi siphindze siwaside ukuthi create ema. Can you stop?
All right, let's quickly go for an ad break. Sabiya khona manje.
Hi, I'm Alex. Let's talk about banks. Specifically, central banks. Believe it or not, they're really important to our everyday lives. Central banks manage the flow of money in a country's economy, so things don't go haywire. They're typically part of the government, although they should operate independently. The specific roles of central banks vary from country to country, but they usually have a few key responsibilities. Mainly, they're in charge of monetary policy to keep prices stable. One way they do this is through what's called the interest rate, which is the cost of borrowing money. Central banks lower interest rates, making credit cheap to boost the economy. Because when credit to buy things, such as homes, food, and cars gets cheaper, people tend to buy more. And who doesn't love that? But when prices get too high, central banks can raise rates, making money more expensive to borrow. This can slow growth, but it also brings down prices. Central banks also buy and sell foreign currency. They can do this to weaken or support the value of their own currency. Stability isn't just about keeping prices steady. That's why central banks also play a key role in preserving financial stability. For example, if a commercial bank is in trouble, a central bank can give them a loan, but only as a last resort. Central banks have been using all of these tools to help keep things stable for hundreds of years. Okay, so why am I telling you this? Well, whether you're buying bread, or a pomegranate, or even starting a business, that stability is important for all of us. And here at the IMF, a big part of our job is providing policy advice that can help central banks all over the world meet their price and financial stability goals.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.za. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
Welcome back. It's 19 minutes after 2. We now go through our market analysis for today. We're joined by Sanile Sibiya, in-house economist. A very good afternoon, Sanile. Thank you for joining us. We start in the U.S. as usual. Israel and Iran, the ceasefire is still in place, and the dollar, it seems the dollar has dropped. What's happening today?
Thank you, Lungelele, and good afternoon to the viewer. So what we are experiencing, it's been quite a turbulent, not necessarily turbulent, it's been a good 24 hours, if I must say. Because remember, last night before markets closed in the US, we were on a thank you, Iran, for giving us enough warning to prepare for this strike, which somehow stated to the markets that no, we are not going to see any further retaliation coming through from Iran, and this was just a choreographed type of attack, just to show that they can respond as well. And then markets actually read into that, and they closed on a positive. And then when you look into Europe as well, Asia, and all of those other markets, when they opened in early trade, those sentiments were actually reverberating across markets, stating that no, we are not seeing that escalation go any further. And then, when that happened, we started seeing the price of Brent crude oil coming down, the price of Texas oil, and all the major oil indicators that you want to track. They were now coming down. We're like at $68 per barrel on Brent crude oil from that 77 type of mark in just a space of 2 hours. So now that's because markets had somehow ruled out the fact that Iran might actually block the Straits of Hormuz, which actually is responsible for 20% of the world's fuel outlet, right? It's one of those conduits that you use to send oil across the globe, and, those disruptions to supply chains. So we are seeing a bit of a relative calm in markets, and markets across the globe are reacting positively. And now, when you look into just the past 2 hours, you've rightly said, there's been a ceasefire.
Yeah.
So now a ceasefire means we are getting to a point where the hostilities have ceased between Russia and Iran, between Iran and Israel. Remember, Iran is the world's 9th largest producer of global oil output. So all those news, Lungilele, you see, they are just feeding positive into the markets, with the S&P 500 back on that 6,000 mark. The Nasdaq maintaining that 19,000 mark, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average is the biggest gainer, staying on that 42,500 mark. So we're seeing a bit of calm coming back into the markets. That's the same story we're seeing when we get to Europe. Again, Europe is building on this optimism. Is building on the optimism that we now have a ceasefire in Gaza, in Israel and Iran. So now the only wars we're dealing with is Gaza and Ukraine, right? So markets are now going to zero back in on, the basic trade fragilities and those uncertainties. At least we seem to have averted, at least for now, we seem to have averted one of the biggest geopolitical tensions that could have thrown the entire Middle East into complete disarray, and then markets spiraling out of control. So we're seeing Germany, which is a major importer of those oils, and it's a major manufacturer. So now that we're seeing a bit of calm in terms of the oil price, the Germans are responding positively to that. And that means we do expect the European Central Bank to continue on that downward trajectory in terms of interest rate cuts. So that's why we're going to expect to see those happen as we move closer to the 9th of July, where those tariffs, the 90-day freeze on tariffs comes into effect. But at least this ceasefire takes away that additional layer of uncertainty, which was brought about by this war. Same thing when you move into Asia. Asia again is performing very well, just recouping those gains that those losses that we saw in the previous days. But what we are noting, Lungelele, is we are not yet seeing all-time highs, but markets are just reacting to get back to the level they were a week before this war started, which is quite a positive. So that means now markets are going to start looking for other clues in terms of how the economy is going to go, in terms of what's going to happen to those interest rates, in terms of what is going to happen, to those growth figures and all of those other issues. But we're seeing a bit of some positive coming back into the stock markets, with the Hang Seng, back on the 24,000 mark. But what we love and what we're seeing about the Hang Seng, Lungelele, is it seems the Hang Seng is back now on the 24,000 mark. Remember, the Hang Seng's been struggling to just get back to those pre-COVID levels, but it seems now they're back on those pre-COVID levels. And that means there's been a bit of a renewed trust in terms of trade within Hong Kong. And then when you come into South Africa again, we're seeing those positive reactions to those news of a ceasefire, gaining some 593 points in today's trade. So when you couple that with the fundamentals in South Africa in terms of what's happening with the GNU, load shedding, load management, or whatever you want to call it, and those restructuring of production, we're seeing South Africa doing relatively well, and it seems to be stabilizing around 94,000 in this past 2 weeks when we've been following the numbers. And that ceasefire is actually propelling those numbers and improving the outlook. We've not seen any movement in the local Eswatini Stock Exchange, but when you look at currencies, when you look at commodities, there we can see that beautiful shift in terms of the price of Brent crude oil. Yesterday, when we were tracking the numbers, we were at $77, $78 per barrel, but now we are at $68.47 per barrel, and we should be moving back to that 64, 63 type of region once we get a bit more clarity in terms of whether this ceasefire is actually going to hold or not, because right now that's what's going to give signals to the markets in terms of which direction we want to take. And then also we're seeing gold also moving, regressing back a bit because the uncertainty, the risk seems to have been avoided. So people are now going to shift their portfolio holdings back into liquidity, into assets, and then move away from hedging through gold and then moving into those equities. And then in terms of the currencies, the movement and the shifts that comes with this ceasefire, Lungelele, what we're seeing there is it's telling of the story that we were seeing with gold as well as in terms of a hedging type of commodity. We were seeing, a lot of funds of forex moving towards the dollar during those times of uncertainty because it wasn't clear what was going to happen with the with the Israel-Iran war. So what people needed was, to have their cash holdings in a currency that can be trusted to hold value even during times of turbulence. So right now with that ceasefire, we're seeing those emerging currencies gaining some strength, including the Lilangeni. So we're now back on that 17 Lilangeni 72 cents per dollar. We are back on that 20 Malangeni 55 cents per euro. And we're losing a bit of strength against the Japanese yen. We are at that 1A with 8 Malangeni 18 cents per Japanese yen, purely because the yen also follows the same type of trajectory that shift from dollar to local-based currencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bia. Well, there you have it. These are today's numbers. This is how we wrap up Market View today with today's market analysis with Asanilis Bia. Thank you for tuning in. We've come to the end of our program. We'll join us again at exactly 2 p.m. tomorrow for Nedbank Business Watch. If you've just tuned in, why not? You can still watch this episode on our YouTube page. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a lovely day.
the voiceless. Your eyes in the far-flung reaches of the world. The Observers, a network of 5,000 committed citizens working with France 24.
One of our observers in Côte d'Ivoire.
Amateur footage and testimonials checked by our journalists and broadcast weekly on The Observers, on France 24 and observers.france24.com.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Jeannie Godgela in Paris. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Israel and Iran both claiming the other broke a ceasefire meant to put a pause on their 12-day war. Israel's defense minister saying the country will respond with force. An Iranian state-linked agency saying the news about a post-truce missile attack on Israel was false. Well, explosions boomed and sirens sounded across northern Israel just 2 hours after both Israel and Iran accepted that ceasefire plan that was proposed by Donald Trump. That truce deal was negotiated after Tehran launched a limited retaliatory missile attack on a U.S. base in Qatar. And Donald Trump is set to make his first appearance at NATO since returning to the White House. Well, earlier this Tuesday, both Israel and Iran accepted a ceasefire plan to end the 12-day war. That truce was proposed by the U.S. President Donald Trump. Just a few hours, though, after it was announced, Israel accused Iran of breaking the ceasefire, an accusation that was then denied by Iran. The Israeli